Welcome back to Software Without Borders, where we explore the ever-evolving world of software and its impact on businesses and industries worldwide. I'm your co-host, Andy Hilliard, CEO of Accelerance.
I'm Tomas Hilliard, the Director of Strategy and Consulting at Accelerance.
Today, we're thrilled to have John Collins join us. John is an accomplished leader with 2-decade track record at renowned corporations like Microsoft and Apple, and scale-ups such as Snapchat, Vinted, and Flixbus. Is it Flixbus, John?
That's right. Yeah, they're the owners of Greyhound.
He's also the founder of Yogan, a new startup focused on fundamentally improving the hiring process. John, we're excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
So, John, you worked, as I said in the intro, you worked at Microsoft, Apple, and scale-ups. And I'm really curious because this topic is extremely interesting to me. In fact, we wrote about it in one of our new books, The True Cost of Software Development. Actually, chapter 1 is about speed and quality of hiring and how much value is lost throughout that entire process. But I want to start at the very beginning. So, can you tell me sort of what universal hiring challenges you've experienced over your lifetime, and why effective hiring is so strategic for growth?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a topic that's also near and dear to my heart. So diving into this, I've worked in the United States across Silicon Valley, Seattle, Los Angeles, some of these major tech hubs, as well as abroad in Berlin, Germany, and worked with a variety of people from different cultures and different backgrounds. And so across this, I would notice very similar kinds of problems accordingly, whether there was a large company, a smaller company, or a company that was based in the US or in Europe. What tends to happen is a lot of companies will base their hiring process on what might have been done before, whether that's what the hiring manager did before, what the recruiter did before, or maybe some rough guidelines as to what the company recommends. But what often happens is that the requirements of, for example, of hiring a data scientist and the norms and the way to kind of evaluate the technical expertise is often very different from another kind of role, like a software engineer or from a product manager. So we tried to kind of put in this one size fits all for all sorts of different kinds of roles. That's one common challenge. Another area that we often see, especially in job markets like now, where there tends to be a lot of layoffs and there's a lot of applicants applying for each job, is that companies have a little bit more control over being more picky accordingly with that. And they're tending to err on this side of, well, we really want to hire that perfect person. And so we really need to de-risk our process. And therefore, we need to be really sure that we want to hire this person because we have 1,000 applicants for it. And therefore, we're going to have 5, 10 interview stages in order to really be sure that we're going to hire the right person. And unfortunately, in this market, we have candidates that will jump through those hoops. And that's often not the right way to do it. As we have more stages, it doesn't necessarily de-risk the process. In fact, it can increase the risk of the process as we have more cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. We have more potential for bias. We have more potential for engineering resources being dedicated to some of these interview processes that might not provide the right level of output to de-risk. And so these are common challenges that I see across a variety of different companies. Yeah.
That is so fascinating. I mean, as a CEO of this company over 20 years, I've read countless books, obviously many articles, been on webinars, changed our methodology. Just has got it's a real big challenge. But at the same time, the market is changing. The market has been changing for all of us. The landscape is changing. The tools are changing. The methodologies are changing. There's a new pundit or process, out every single year. And I think there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace. So what can you describe some of the things that have changed over the last decade or more as far as how hiring has changed? Has it accelerated? Has it slowed down? How does it impact business outcomes?
The obvious answer to this one is AI being used across the interview processes when that wasn't necessarily used 10 years ago. But I'd like to dive into maybe how that induces its own kind of bias and can actually be a negative side for a lot of companies that are leveraging this. So companies have been doing some levels of scale backs, and whether that's due to potentially some market conditions or competitors that might also be doing layoffs or different business proposals and strategies that have resulted in layoffs. When you're not hiring, you tend to not need or need less resources towards recruitment. And that kind of makes sense because there's this optimal level of number of technical recruiters required for a certain number of hiring per engineers. But what we've seen a lot of is a lot of outsourcing of that expertise. And what that means is when you're outsourcing, that's not necessarily a bad thing in a lot of cases when there's a really good relationship with that contractor that's helping to do that hiring with the company. But what that means is that there can also be a disconnect. So that outsourcing might mean that they're going to simply execute on what the company says instead of being like a strategic advisor to say, we've noticed that the market is demanding this, or that this is kind of a typical way of doing technical interviews. When you have an internal recruiter, you tend to have a little bit stronger relationship between the HR team and the engineering team to be able to
Sure.
define and really evaluate that. What we've also seen is a lot of recruiters, because they tend to be understaffed now, or some companies have been letting go of their technical recruiters. They've been trying to rely on AI to be able to fill in that role. I have a very strong opinion towards this that that's not the right move. AI tends to look for certain keywords in people's resumes. And so you have people now that are trying to cheat systems, like they're adding all the keywords that are there. There's a lot of tools out there to be able to cheat technical interviews. And so, I mean, this is inherently a problem of what's happening is that we're having a wrong interview process. If we have a fair interview process that's quick and good for candidates, and candidates feel like it's properly evaluating them in a fair and quick manner, they're not going to use cheating software. They're just there's too much of an overhead. There's too much risk associated with using a cheating software. They're going to go through that process and be happy to do so if they feel that it's a fair way. But because we're now outsourcing that, and there's a lot of companies that are over-promising that they can be able to find that needle in the haystack, so to speak, and you don't need to go through manually 100 resumes. We have this AI tool that is a black box for a lot of companies, and they don't know how it's evaluating, but it is somehow kind of bubbling up a few of those resumes. It's going through and evaluating people's answers. And this is inherently, in my opinion, a very human-centric problem that we should be having humans evaluate, not machines, due to the bias associated with that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great situational analysis and precursor to our the exploration that we want to do about Yogan. So, Tomas.
Yeah, that takes us over to Yogan. Your startup Yogan aims to change hiring forever. I would like to hear from you, John. How will this company disrupt traditional hiring models? And tell us about your long-term vision for this company.
Absolutely. And that's an ambitious promise that we're trying to do, and we know that. But we have expertise on staff within our group of expert technical recruiters with decades of experience, and engineering managers and engineering leaders who have been through and worked at a variety of companies across the world in order to really evaluate what is the best practices here. What our vision at Yogan is to be able to improve hiring processes. And we know that that's not an easy thing. Being able to change user behavior is always a challenge with any company to be able to do. And so we feel like there's a variety of ways that we can help companies be able to do that. So first off is to understand your current hiring process. We offer this functionality for free. You can input in, you go through our evaluation, kind of like in a similar Geico model. In 10 or 15 minutes, we can save you 10% or more. So our objective is that within 10 or 15 minutes, you tell us a little bit about your hiring process, and we can identify some green, yellow, and red flags associated with your current hiring process, and what your hiring process might currently cost. Is for a lot of companies, that's a large unknown, is they don't have a clear idea as to how much it really costs to do a single hire within their company. And then if they decide that they want to address those issues and be able to reduce down the cost and make a better hiring process and make candidates have a higher offer acceptance rate, lower turnover, and make it also where it's a cheaper hiring process for their company, that's where we offer services towards working with them through our automated software to be able to define a great hiring process that works for them based on their role. If they decide that, hey, this isn't going to work for me, or this additional stage is a requirement for our company, that's okay. What we want to offer then is a level of risk associated with that. So we're going to tell them, hey, you're adding an additional stage. That's going to add an additional $3,000 of cost to your hiring process. You're now going to have a 3% reduction in offer acceptance rates, and you're going to not be able to meet your timeline associated with when you wanted to be able to hire somebody. So your offer date. And from there, we also want to make sure that companies are really ready and prepared for interviewing, and that they're representing themselves in the best possible light. What we often see is that companies will put people into interviewing and representing that company, and they've never been properly trained on how to do an interview. That's a really scary thing, not only because it can open them up for liability when they ask inappropriate questions, but it also, this is the first time that a candidate has the opportunity to see and interact with a representative from the company. And ideally, they should be excited and want to continue through this process. And they're going to do that when they feel like the questions are really great, that it's evaluating them, that they're not getting asked the same questions that they got asked in the previous interview, that they're ready and prepared for that interview. They're not just reading the resume, live in the first 5 minutes of the interview. And by doing these and making sure that the interviewers are prepared for interviewing, we believe we can also make a better hiring process. So these are just some of the functionality that we want to offer companies that are using our services.
John, I think this is really interesting because the business value is very clear. It makes hiring faster, it cuts down on the cost. Something that you're continually bringing up is the impact that it's actually having on the interviewee. I'm curious as to how this positive experience trickles down the line in a business sense. How does this positive experience down the line help with making sure that this interviewee is more comfortable, happy, and ultimately delivers better long-term value to that company that they're selecting?
Yeah, I love this question because ultimately companies are the ones that are going to be buying our software. And unless we have a strong value proposition towards helping them to save time and money, they're not going to be using the software, even if it really makes a better hiring experience, because they're already going to have 1,000 applicants and people will jump through those hoops, at least one person to be able to get to the end through that interview process. So there's aspects towards some startups have tried to have some software that can help candidates, whether that's through cheating software, unfortunately, or through software that kind of helps to evaluate job descriptions and prepare the right keywords and update their resumes accordingly with those right things to help to pass through, cover letters and resume writing to kind of get into the first stage. I have a strong fundamental belief that that's pretty predatory with candidates. I don't think that people that are unemployed and money is tight, it's a high risk situation, that those are the right people that we should be targeting from a business side. Those are people that ideally, like once they have a job, they're no longer going to be paying for those services anymore. And so it kind of becomes almost like a dating app, for example, where it's like you have an incentive to keep people onto your platform. And in our opinion, this is kind of like the win-win-win situation, which is that if we're helping companies to save time and money, and ideally then also what kind of comes along for that ride is a great hiring process, then candidates have a great experience as well with this. I'll give kind of some concrete examples. It's always kind of wild to me that specifically in the United States, where employers are typically the ones that are offering healthcare benefits for their employees, that candidates are not aware of the deductibles or the copays required for the healthcare plan that their employer will provide, typically until an offer is made, or even then it might not even be provided until like they get the healthcare packet after they join. And while that might not be a big deal for a person who is maybe single, let's say you have a person who has to take care of their family, or they have a child who has a lot of healthcare needs. That amount of out-of-pocket expenses can be a huge factor for the level of compensation required in order to make that role fit for them. And what happens a lot is that an offer then is prepared. The company has spent many hours and tons of this hidden cost associated with getting this candidate and evaluating them, making sure that they're right, they've aligned up on the salary, but then the healthcare benefits aren't what they need, and the out-of-pocket expenses are going to be too high, and they have to decline a role. If that happens 1 out of every 100 times, that's too many. This is something that, in my opinion, should be transparent upfront to the candidate at the very beginning, and then the candidate can self-screen. If they're like, hey, this doesn't work for me, that's fine. You didn't go through the interview process. You didn't waste time and effort. The company didn't spend time with this. So there's aspects towards being a little bit more transparent up front that can save you a ton of time on the back end and ideally create like a better process, more transparency, candidates like it better, and have higher offer acceptance rates. So that's just kind of a concrete example towards that.
That's really interesting. It seems like you're truly approaching this problem from a holistic standpoint, and I'm curious as to what pain points that you're specifically solving that you saw some of the previous incumbents miss in their attempt to solve this same problem.
Well, we've evaluated a lot of other types of potential competitors within this space. And what they tend to do is fall into a few different buckets. So some are applicant tracking systems, so ATS systems. And what they really are is for ensuring compliance, like GDPR compliance, the personally identifiable information of candidates is protected, and making sure that kind of people are aligned and that there's a central place where people can like provide feedback, for example, on the interview. ATS systems can provide a lot more. Like Workday has a whole holistic suite for tracking like vacation days and et cetera within that. But the problem with ATS systems is that they tend to be very expensive, very complicated, and very difficult to be able to integrate in with their companies. So companies can spend months trying to do an integration because there's so much upfront work to get everybody within the system. And then once they are in, it's very hard to change later. I mean, good business model for them, and that's why they're worth sometimes billions of dollars. But that also makes it where it's not necessarily a great software experience. Like, I don't know how many people say that they actually love using Workday and they love entering in their same resume information on every job application that uses Workday rather than having like a universal login system. Workday is not a software that people say that they love typically. But there is software that's out there that does try to improve the interview process at different stages. So like there's software like LeetCode, for example, that provides a technical evaluation of candidates with either a bank of questions or having screen sharing, and then it uses like AI to understand what they're developing and to kind of provide a level of a score or a level of risk associated with hiring this person or proceeding forward with those stages. Again, I'm pretty firmly opinionated on this, that I don't think that that's actually representative of what happens in a real world work scenario. That, I've worked at a lot of software engineering companies and I know thousands of software engineers, and not one have I ever seen that says like, you're going to have your screen recorded and you have to do this problem in 1 hour or less, and then we're going to evaluate you and your entire performance is based on how this does at the end of this 1 hour. Like, it's not realistic accordingly with that. It feels very much like going back to the university days and putting, an unnecessary pressure on candidates that isn't representative of what they're actually going to do in the real world. And therefore, you're evaluating in a way that's not necessarily accurate. So like, some people can study for months for preparing for LeetCode tests. And that's great for the people that have the capability towards that. But a lot of times those questions aren't even representative of what the real world work will be. And there's other people, for example, like imagine like a single parent that doesn't necessarily have the time at home to be able to dedicate months and hundreds of hours to prepping for these kinds of things. So again, I kind of view that as predatory towards candidates, that is a bias towards a certain kind of candidate towards that. So within Yogan, what we try to do, for example, is provide technical evaluation options that they can choose from. Some companies like LeetCode because it's very easy for the company. They can say, here, this is the one that we're going to evaluate on, and then at the end, they're going to get a score on a candidate. So companies like that it's very low pressure for them, but it's a ton of pressure for the candidate side. Well, other candidates might feel more comfortable, for example, let's say sharing their GitHub profile, and they're going to kind of do like a soft presentation about some of their open source projects. That can be great if the role requires that they have to present, or that maybe they're working on open source code at their job. But that can be a preference or maybe a better option for candidates if they so choose with that. But a lot of people don't feel comfortable giving presentations, and if that's not a part of the role, then we shouldn't be evaluating and making that the requirement. There's other ways that, for example, like of doing pair programming exercises. That tends to be really quite realistic for what is real world. You kind of get a sense of working with somebody one-on-one or two-on-one that's there. You can kind of help out each other. It feels a little bit more collaborative, but that requires more work on the company. Like you're going to have an engineer or two dedicated for that hour or 2 hours to do that, and that's not always available or a luxury that companies have. So our proposal with Yogan is, as you're defining this interview process, which we expect that would take about an hour or so, working with the hiring manager and the recruiter, and they can go through our software and we provide this level of feedback, is to understand their risks and their trade-offs and make the right decision for them. And if they want to proceed with leak code, that's okay. But now it's transparent about the level of risk associated with that. And then we'll inform the candidates right up front that this is going to be a part of the technical interview process at stage 4, for example. And that way they know that this is something that they're okay with, or if they're not okay, then self-screen and don't apply for the job. So yeah, hopefully that provides some guidance on how we plan to solve those kinds of things.
I find it really interesting, John, and obviously these nuances and considerations exist for domestic hires, but these exist as well for global teams and hiring global talent. I'm curious as to uh, how global considerations play a part in this story.
Right. So there tends to be more commonality than differences between, at least between European companies and US based companies when hiring for technical roles. They tend to still go through roughly the same structure of a recruiter interview, hiring manager interview, technical interview, team interview, and then sometimes some additional stages like an as appropriate, maybe with like a director or VP, maybe an additional technical interview stage. But in regards to some of the major differences that we see, one is about compensation. And it's specifically around US-based companies are very heavily, especially for tech companies, will skew towards stock options or employee stock purchase plans. These kinds of areas that are really a necessary part of the total compensation, especially when we're talking about companies that might be more based in Silicon Valley, for example, where the bread and butter and you kind of live and breathe and die by the capability for having companies with successful stock options. While in Europe, this is pretty dependent upon the country, but they tend to be a lot less commonly offering those kinds of stock options or compensation packages towards that, and it's more about base salary, number of vacation days, etc. But regardless, we want to be able to help companies provide this level of information transparently. So we know that stock options are sometimes a little bit of like a monopoly money until the company has a liquidity event. But a lot of employees will join a company and they say, "Oh, I got 1,000 stock options," and it's like, well, what does that mean? Oh, 1,000 seems like a large number, but really you find out that like each stock option is worth 1 cent until the company reaches a Series B or whatever, and therefore that stock option is really like not worth a lot. So part of this also is about informing candidates to make the right decisions. You don't want to have a candidate that accepts an offer, they join, and then 6 months later they're like, oh, they talk with a fellow person, and they're like, yeah, our stock options are underwater, or stock options aren't going to have a liquidity event until we plan to have an exit event, and that's probably not going to happen for 4 years plus. Like, people need to be informed and upfront about that, because that really factors into their level of pay transparency, happiness, performance, and making sure that people are feeling like they're being paid fairly and accurately. So part of our level of guidance as well, and this is a free resource that we offer, is an entire series of documentation around pay and how stock options work, how employee stock purchase plans work. Again, because we don't want to be charging for candidates, we want candidates to feel comfortable with the decisions that they're making, so that way there's a higher offer acceptance rate and there's lower turnover once an employee joins. And so part of that is we feel like can be solved with a level of strong transparency towards candidates. But those happen to be some of the major differences that we see towards European side and the US side. There's a few other factors, for example, like what kinds of questions you can ask, what's common in resumes, like including your picture, or including your birthday or not, are some of the big differences, including your visa and work status, is a different one. But that's a little bit more on the guidance on the candidate side. There's also in Europe strong GDPR regulations in terms of like what you can record, how long that information can be stored for. So we offer some level of guidance towards that. It's not legal advice, but it's at least kind of a rough first stab at this, especially because we expect that some of our customers and the companies that are using our software might be more like a Series A size company where maybe they don't have a technical recruiter that started. They might not know the requirements that are here. And so we want to be able to provide them some level of guidance towards kind of making sure that they're following things in the right steps accordingly with the country and the situation that they're based in.
John, I want to take a quick step back because I want to have a clear understanding of your ICP, your ideal client profile, large or small, within specific functions or not, and this may be evolving over time. And also, where in the recruiting stack Yogan fits? Is it there's certain things that a large applicant tracking system might be necessary for, and things that Yogan purposely does not fulfill. And there's other tools that are being used to test candidates outside of Yogan. I just want to have an understanding. So if I were a client, in my particular case, is Yogan a great option? How do I interact with it? How do I contract with it? And how does it all fit within a stack?
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a great question. I mean, so they can visit getyogan.com and they can do an evaluation. They can do that free audit accordingly. And then they can sign up for also a 30-day free trial to make sure that the software works for them and that it kind of fits in with what they need. We think that in 30 days, you can develop a good hiring process and start executing on that hiring process and already start seeing some results within that free trial accordingly. But we view our ICP, we had a lot of internal discussions around ICP. And what we find, at least for our soft launch coming up, is that our ICP is companies that are around 50 people in size to around 1,000 people in size. These are companies that tend to be a little bit more flexible with their hiring processes. They view hiring as a competitive advantage for them. Candidates that are interviewing at their company might also be interviewing at more well-recognized or more name brand companies. And so that provides a unique challenge for them. And then therefore we want to be able to give them that competitive edge for hiring that level of talent. But also, I mean, larger companies can absolutely benefit from an improved hiring process. But there's factors towards like changing, for example, Amazon's hiring process would be a huge hurdle. You know, they've been doing things in the same way for 30 years, and I would not say they're necessarily doing things in the right way. And a lot of candidates have had very poor experiences interviewing there, and it still takes them 6 months, to hire somebody, which is wild. And a lot of companies will say, oh, well, Amazon hires smart people, or Google hires smart people. We're just going to copy their interview process. But often what is working for them isn't necessarily working for others. And people tend to go through a 6-month interview process with Google because they're going to offer a lot of money, or because of the name brand, or because of benefits, et cetera. And so, yeah, what works for them doesn't necessarily work for others. And I would argue that it's not working either way for them as well. But we want to target companies that are a little bit more flexible. We've also, with our pricing structure, it's also in accordance with, we did a lot of research for what companies have for discretionary budgets within their HR departments. And that tends to be around $10,000 to $20,000 per year that they can spend on software that might save them time, might save them money, might improve things. We kind of call it like that no-brainer pricing, quote unquote. And so we wanted to price ourselves accordingly, with that they could try this out, they could give it a shot for a year, making sure that it's working for them, go through multiple hires accordingly with that, without needing to spend a lot of money for in order to really validate that. ATS systems can cost millions of dollars per year. I mean, it's wild. But
Mm.
talking about where Yogan fits in with that level of tech stack, there is some level of HR software that is needed in order for a company to usually function accordingly once they kind of reach a certain size, and they have to really start making sure that all of these requirements are in place. So one is an applicant tracking system. Yogan is not an applicant tracking system. By design, we do not accept resumes at this time because those are already embedded within the applicant tracking system. Those are already doing the GDPR compliance, the personal identifiable information compliance already within it, and companies are already firmly embedded with that ATS. So that's great. There's resources out there, and we provide some level of guidance towards different ATSs that might be better for smaller companies versus larger companies. There's a lot of cost differences and complexity differences in what they can offer. So we offer some level of guidance in case there's like a 25-person startup that's never used an ATS and they're tracking everybody in Excel and they want to kind of go with an ATS. We have documentation and some level of support towards ATS recommendations, and we don't get a cut out of that. We don't want to be biased and offer an affiliate towards that. This is purely based on our experience and having worked in these different environments and making sure that people can feel like they can trust our recommendations. There is other software that's out there like a LinkedIn license that's typically required for recruiters. This is incredibly expensive. I mean, it can cost $10,000 plus per recruiter in order to be able to have being able to cold message people, doing Boolean searches, etc. Again, we're not a social media company. I mean, there's already places out there where candidates can be found, like Indeed, Monster.com, Well-Found, LinkedIn, etc. That offers towards that. But another service that is a part of our package when they're paying for our software is we provide them, when they've defined this hiring process, from our expertise in recruiters, we know that kind of you don't want to, like when you're doing a broad search and trying to find somebody on LinkedIn, if you're doing a search and there's 10,000 search results, well, that's not really that helpful and you're not going to go message 10,000 people. And if there's 3 people, that kind of come up in your search result, that's also not very useful. And your chances of getting a reply back are pretty low from that. So from our expertise, what we've noticed is that it tends to be that you kind of want to start your search with around 1 to 200 people. You're not going to message all of them, but that provides kind of a good starting point to start evaluating candidates, double checking with the hiring manager that it matches that criteria. And so when they define their hiring process with us, we provide them the exact right Boolean search criteria that will get them to around 1 to 200 people that they can just copy and paste into LinkedIn accordingly and be able to run to the races. Proper Boolean search criteria for using LinkedIn tends to be something that more mid-level to senior recruiters are better at, and junior recruiters tend to not be super good at. And that's an area where we're trying to make recruiters more effective accordingly. So that's just one of the value propositions that we want to offer. So in terms of where Yogan kind of fits in with this tech stack, we are ATS agnostic. We are agnostic to the to your searching platform for finding candidates, Indeed or LinkedIn. But we want to be able to provide you support for being able to choose those things and making sure that they're accurate, up to date, and that you can use from that hiring process everything that you need in order to be able to successfully execute on that hiring that's required. So from that, we find that to be a unique value proposition where they can fit Yogan into any size company that they need to and any software tech stack that they need to, and making sure that it's the right fit for them because we're agnostic towards that.
Interesting. Hey, John, I want to jump in and ask a question surrounding AI. So you've emphasized earlier a lean approach to AI, optimizing for pennies. I'm curious as to how you architect cost-effective yet functional AI systems at scale.
It's a great question. I mean, this is something where we find that we're probably bucking the trend a little bit. I think a lot of companies are trying to pigeonhole or stuff, AI where it might not necessarily make sense. And there can be a lot of negatives towards using AI, at least today. I'll give kind of some concrete examples. If a company says, they go to ChatGPT and they said, define for me a hiring process. Yeah, it'll make one for you. Is it going to be good? No, it's not going to be also accurate for, the nuances accordingly with your team. it's not going to have like that expert level of guidance associated with that. It's not going to know, the requirements and going through everything about the job, like alternative job titles. What is the Boolean search we should be making? This team tends to have difficulty with let's say interpersonal communication. So we really want to hire somebody that is an expert in this that can help out to bring out the nuances of the team. This is where a relationship with a recruiter and a team we find is much stronger, and like that's not something that an AI can handle. And also, like, if you ask and write up 20 pages for an AI to say define for me a hiring process with this, it's also super time consuming. It might not be good or accurate. So our line in the sand is that if something potentially could impact either the time to hire or the cost to hire, we make a very cognitive effort to rely on our expert level guidance associated with that and hard code in risks and requirements associated with that, rather than relying on an AI that we can't necessarily trust and we don't necessarily know the output, or if they run it 3 times, they're going to get 3 different answers associated with that. But there are areas where we think that AI can be really good for helping out their company to where there's a less risk or no risk associated with the time to hire or the cost to hire. I'll give you a couple of concrete examples towards this and how we're able to reduce down the costs associated with that. What tends to happen is a lot of companies are using or even on board like having their own hardware for GPS or excuse me, GPUs costing potentially thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. They're training their own data sets. And from our experience, it's not that much better and not that much different than using other tools that are already kind of out there. The level of the LLMs is changing almost on a weekly basis. I mean, what's good today might not be good next week. Or something better could come along, or something that's cheaper could come along. But a lot of companies get super embedded with using one LLM, and they're spending a ton of money, usually VC money, associated with training these data sets. And from our experience, it's not that much better than already kind of going with other parties and being able to switch accordingly with what might be better.
Mm-hmm.
What a lot of companies tend to do is, if, for example, like they're driving a Ferrari and taking their kids to school with it. Like, is that the most practical thing? Is that, I mean, yeah, it's this super performant LLM, but then there's also a cost associated with that, like the insurance, the maintenance, the upkeep and everything. And likewise with LLMs, there's a similar scenario with us where we see that people are trying to use that Ferrari for all sorts of their LLM needs, and that's not necessarily the best choice. And there's cheaper LLMs that could be suiting their needs and be pennies on the dollar, and that could be just as good for what they need. So that's the approach that we've taken. Is wherever we have AI, we've evaluated a lot of different models associated with that, and we try to go with the cheapest model that suits the needs of our customer, and that has been validated from our internal recruiters that say, yes, this is accurate information and this is good. What that does also is that means that we can charge less for our software for our customers, and our customers can use it more extensively without having certain limitations like other software that's out there where you have tokenization limitations, or they say you can only run this like 100 times per month, or you need to go to a higher price tier. We don't have that because we're running cheaper LLMs in certain cases, and we're running those Ferrari LLMs when necessary. And that's transparent to the customer, or transparent to them, but it's also about, like, they don't need to know like what LLM we chose for what area. They just need to make sure that the right level of information is presented in the right spot. I'll give a couple of examples of specifically where we use AI and where we don't. So one area, for example, going back to one of the features I mentioned earlier, is about training interviewers. They often never receive training. Training is very expensive. If they get on-site training, or their recruiters are training them, it can be like, okay, hey, everybody, we're going to have like an all-day training on this. And I mean, maybe they're going to get this once every year or once every couple of years if they do. So this is a very cost prohibitive experience, and not everybody is well suited to being a trainer. Like recruiters aren't necessarily great at public speaking and, training a bunch of people for half a day on this. It can be very time intensive to kind of prepare for that kind of stuff. And what we have developed for example, is a series of training opportunities for interviewers to be able to practice real world scenarios. So one thing is once a role has been created in the hiring process, we now know where you're going to hire, what is the job title, what is the salary expectations, what is the interview process, for example. So we have that already defined, and then you tell us what is your role. Like for example, I'm an engineer, and I'm going to be interviewing this candidate at the technical interview stage, and you have an option. Then you can either get a quote unquote random candidate, or you can practice with certain kinds of candidates that might be more difficult, more easy to kind of help to prepare your level of experience and going through these kinds of scenarios. And then we go through a mock interview with a auto generated, not real but accurate towards the job description that you defined, candidate. And just like as if you're on the other side of the table, you get to talk with the candidate. This candidate could be somebody that overpromises, somebody that underpromises, somebody that is super confident, somebody that's very shy. And so we have all these different kinds of personalities that they can test themselves with, and they can evaluate and see how their questions that they want to ask are going to go with this kind of candidate. Like, oh, is this a good question? Is this not? Are you making this candidate kind of feel uncomfortable, or is this question kind of putting this at ease? How did you kind of word that question? And after every question, we provide a level of guidance associated with how is that question. Could that have question been worded in a different way, maybe in a better way? Could you put the candidate more at ease? Because again, this is about improving that level of candidate experience. And then we try to gamify it a little bit. So maybe taking some, maybe this will date me a little bit, but like using Doom back in the day, you know, how you could like see your character at the bottom, and you can see like how they're doing with their health. We want to make this fun and make people want to engage with this. So for example, like we have a picture, it's a cartoon image of a candidate. It's random on which one they're going to get. So just like in real life, like some are older, some are younger, some are transgender, some are male, some are female, and they have an opportunity to then talk with this person. So we have different kind of digital twins associated with how that person react. We then also have like a heart meter and how they're feeling. So like you can see kind of their heart rate go up if you're asking like a tough question. You can feel that they're feeling a little bit more tense or a little bit more at ease. And generally, like we want to offer advice to not put candidates into a tense situation. We want them to feel like it's fun. And so they can do this training software at any time. They can practice it as much as they want. They can get that random candidate, or they can get maybe a tougher candidate or an easier candidate to kind of practice. They can practice their questions in a safe environment where they don't have like their manager, you know, sitting in their room, for example, or getting some score at the end that kind of is a stressful thing. Because ideally we want people to feel like they're prepared going into an interview associated with that. So that's just one of the areas where we use AI. We have it all across our software in a lot of different areas, but we want to try to use this in ways that feel fun and engaging, and not necessarily things that are going to where we can't trust the data that comes out of it.
That's amazing. You know, I feel like what you're describing is not a step forward, but a huge leap forward in this entire process. I'm super excited to see a demo and the things you've described. It seem completely out of step with the history of recruiting and recruiting tools and software. So I find it amazing. But I also want to know, because you're a relative startup, like how are you communicating these benefits of better hiring, higher acceptances, reduced costs, speed to hire? How are you translating that and communicating that to C-level people in terms of an ROI? How are you getting through to them? Because you know, I know what we do at Accelerants. There's a ton of hidden costs and value, either value potentially gained or lost through the leveraging of global talent and recruiting, speed to market, you know, speed to team composition, speed to cultural alignment. All of those things have a value component, which is hard to monetize. All right, it's not hard to monetize. It's hard to describe to stakeholders how much of a monetary impact it has. How do you do it? I want to learn from you, because maybe I can improve our ability to do that as well. We're all struggling to try to get that. Like, it's not just the rate card, or it's not just the cost of the software. It impacts so many different areas. So how do you do it?
I would say this is also a challenge for us. I mean, especially as we're going into our soft launch and then our full V1 release towards this is I think the problem a bit within the market is that there's a lot of HR tools that are out there. A lot. There's like hundreds of tools that are out there. And a lot of them will promise these things. You know, the first words on their website is like, oh, we'll save you time and money, accordingly with that. But what's hidden after you're looking into their software a little bit is that the way that they save you money is by firing a recruiter, and it replaces the recruiter stage of evaluating candidates, or like their automatic scheduling tools, and so you don't need to hire a scheduling person anymore. And so that's like you're gonna go spend $100,000 a year on the software, but you're gonna go not need $150,000 a year recruiter, for example. I don't think that's the right way to do it, and I hope that companies kind of change that mentality, because I think this is where they're leaning very heavily towards AI being able to solve all of this stuff, and I don't think this is necessarily the right way. But again, I'm biased towards that approach, because this is what we've seen work, and we're trying to develop software that can help other companies to develop that. So, for example, what I want to transform recruiters is getting away from the scheduling, getting away from the pain in the butt about messaging, the interview team to be like, hey, please provide us feedback on that interview that you did 2 weeks ago on that candidate, because we can't proceed forward. Like, this is not a good use of recruiter resources and their time. And they're smart, well-compensated individuals, and that is such a waste. Instead, what I want to see is recruiters to be more effective in their roles, and to be able to really be partners and collaborators with engineering teams associated, like knowing the nuances about what are the unique requirements of this team. How can we make sure that if this team really needs somebody very fast, or this team really has a really difficult, for example, technical stack, and we have to find like the perfect person to start day one because we don't have resources available to help to train them. Like, these are nuances that if you just have a generic hiring process, it doesn't work. And what we want is for those recruiters to feel empowered and to know the level of risk associated with, well, what happens when we add an additional stage? What happens when the VP pushes that they have to be a part of the interview loop at the very end of the interview process? And that is now a single point of failure. That if that VP is on vacation, or that VP is now going to say no to hiring this person, what happens to the 3 months of talking with this candidate, and the hiring manager loves this person and wants to hire them, but the VP says no? This is a terrible situation to be in. But if we're well aligned at the very beginning about who are the decision makers for the hiring process, who's going to make the call to action, is that VP interview really required or not? Do we have an alternative to that VP interview? Could that VP interview be optional, or is it absolutely a requirement? What level of contribution is that VP going to provide that wasn't already done in the earlier stages? Like, what kinds of questions are they going to ask, versus are they repeating things that were already asked earlier? In order to really kind of push back on this level, and to say like, okay, you want this VP interview. Okay, you've now added 1 week to the hiring process. Your offer acceptance rate could probably drop as your interview process is now going to be taking longer, and you've added an additional $2,000 to the interview hiring cost by having this individual be a single point of failure. And they're a well-compensated individual that now is saying that they have to be a part of this, and they need to go interview 3 people before they're going to make a decision. Like, that is a huge risk associated with this that is often very little return on that time investment for having that additional stage. If they want to have it, fine, but they should know that risk associated with that, and everybody's aligned. So I think that there's areas where,
For sure.
There's this risk associated with trying to make sure that hiring processes are effective, and making sure that companies are able to execute on that hiring effectively.
Yeah, John, your insights on hiring and in the world of AI, and also with the soft launch of Yogan coming up, I think, honestly, to me, it doesn't seem just evolutionary. It seems transformational. I mean, it just seems like a completely different world we're about to enter. And going from, ATS, I come from the world of, 30 years ago, CRM, where Siebel was just this sort of, hardwired, just it was the workday of customer relationship management, and to come at this with more innovative, nimble approaches. And of course, we didn't live in the world of AI then either. I think is just palpatory. Do you have anything else to add that we're here that now that we're wrapping up?
I would just like to say thank you so much. I mean, for this opportunity. I thought it was a great discussion. I hope that companies that are listening can have the opportunity to understand that they might think that they have control over their hiring processes. They might think that they have a rough idea as to how much it costs to hire a person. But what's often the case is that you add more stages. You have, 3 interviews dedicated towards meeting the team or meeting with stakeholders, et cetera. And there's a huge cost associated with that. But it's not just about cutting out those stages. It's also about making sure that recruiters are more effective in their roles, and making sure that those recruiters can feel empowered, that they're not overloaded. I mean, if you have a recruiter that's going to go try to hire 20 people next month, like, you're not setting yourself up for success, and that's not going to work. And so there's dedicated balances towards making recruiters more efficient. And I think it's hard also because there's a lot of companies out there that are providing, I think, a lot of snake oil for how they're going to be able to save costs and time. And it's not necessarily what's going to work for them. And they're going to try out the software and they're going to get burnt on it, or it's not going to suit their needs, and they're going to be pretty risk adverse for trying other HR software, which is a big factor for why we want to be able to offer a longer trial period. We want to be able to offer some level of free services. And again, I think that goes across. Maybe that's not the best business decision, but that is a decision that we always want to make in order to make a better candidate experience and make sure that companies can feel like they can trust us when we're providing a value add for free already with them. And we think that companies that are willing to try us out will hopefully see a huge cost reduction and time reduction for their level of hiring and make them more efficient.
I hope listeners heard that last part, because I really think you're solving a huge problem uh, in a massive market that is ripe for disintermediation and change. And John, so thank you very much for attending this
Thank you.
podcast. Tomas, I appreciate your help too. And to our listeners, we hope you enjoy this episode of Software Without Borders. If you're interested in learning more about how to optimize your talent acquisition strategies, leveraging AI in hiring, or building high-performing globally distributed teams, be sure to subscribe to our show and leave a 5-star rating.